Thank you, Beth. I can't imagine a nicer rendition. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Hank Wolst, and today I'm pleased to serve as your service leader. A warm welcome to all to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Door County. All of you in here and all of you out there and everyone and everywhere. Before starting the service, let me remind you to silence any electronic devices, please. Also, if you have any difficulty hearing, give us a signal and we'll see what we can do to adjust the systems so that you can hear better. Perhaps this is your first time here. Perhaps it's the first time in quite a long while. It's our custom here at UUFDC to invite either newcomers or people who haven't been here in a while, to stand. Tell us your name and maybe a little bit about why you're here, what brings you here. Gives us a chance to get to know you a little bit better. And then following the service, please join us in the gathering room for coffee and conversation. And subsequent to that, we'll have about a 20-minute talk back with our guest speaker today. And a reminder, please sign our guest book, please. Announcements. This is the time for announcements that we normally allot for announcements. And so I'd like to invite anyone who has an announcement. But before I do that, a bit of housekeeping. And maybe Mary Ann, could I ask you to volunteer to do the mic for us? Because I neglected to do that before starting the service. I'd like to invite anyone who has an announcement to share with the fellowship by raising your hand that announcement. But before I do that, let me go back. I did this one time back about 3 or 4 months ago. And I just invited people to stand. So any newcomers or people who haven't been here in a while, would you please stand now? All together. Anybody who is in either of those two categories? Now you can see why I brushed by it. Please. Hi, how are you, sir?
Jerry Middleman, I lived up here around 12 years. I lived on Old Mexico, Texas today.
Wonderful. Delighted to have you. Anyone else? Please.
Hi, I'm Terry McCoy, and I'm Brett's wife.
And anyone else? Thank you. So let me go to announcements. And if anyone has an announcement they'd like to share, raise your hand. The mic will find you. But I do have one. Vicki, go ahead, but then I'll have an announcement as well.
Thank you. I'm Vicki Ash. I am peddling last-minute gift bags for anybody who has that last-minute little gift they need to stick in a little bag. And they are $10, and all of the money from these bags is going to help this year. And they're right out on the windowsill. What's in them? Somebody said, well, what's in them? Piece of tissue paper, just to make them look nice.
Any other announcements?
Good morning. This coming Thursday at the Stella Maris Catholic Church is Loaves and Fishes dinner. And Laura McDowell had asked if I'd make an announcement. It's from 5 to 6, and it's an Italian dinner. Everybody's welcome. No reservations needed. There will also be music. And please come and join everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you. We always have announcements as well in the back of the order of service. And one of those announcements today talks about a concert here at 1:30 this afternoon. And one of the pianists is here. I don't know the other pianists if they're here or not. But it's Kathy Little and Sandy Stoneham, who are going to be basically playing some four-handed piano, as I understand it. Both at the same piano, which is something I'm looking forward to at 1:30. The other announcement I had is that this month, beginning, I think right now, and they're already hanging, the Playworks, Third Avenue Playworks, has in its lobby an exhibit of 14 Christmas cards and gift prints from the White House dating back to Herbert Hoover all the way up to Barack Obama. They are 14 pieces from buttons in my personal collection. We have about 100 framed pieces. We did not include Biden and Trump, although we have their cards. We thought that might be kind of something that we didn't want to do in this bizarre election year. So do that. They're fascinating. They really are. And then there's a brief commentary about each of them. And again, they're all genuine Christmas cards from the White House. Any other announcements?
Just one more.
Please.
Thanks. Just a little bit about the music this morning. When Hank and I were first talking about the service, he had just not long prior to that conversation seen Joey Alexander here at the Door Community Auditorium and is absolutely smitten by him, rightfully so. So that was our starting conversation about that. That will be the final postlude piece this morning. And then Hank said he was reading Imagine, and could I possibly play that, which of course felt like the fitting opening. And as I was thinking about what Brett will be talking about, just about finding commonality, I was looking through Christmas music and different kinds of things in general and came across this piece, When a Child is Born, which is technically not a Christmas song, but it really felt like a universal human experience. Every culture, everywhere, at any point along the continuum, people experience birth. And so it felt like that was a fitting accompaniment to the message today. The words are on the screen, not to sing along, but just for you to be able to reflect about why those words feel fitting for the rest of the service this morning.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Then I shall light the chalice. With these words, a Ukrainian and a Russian, an Israeli and a Palestinian, a Kosovar and a Serb walk into a bar. They have a drink, and they enjoy each other's company. May it be so. Please stand if willing and able, and join now in the singing of hymn 1008, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. This is in the blue hymnal that you should have. I could have said it earlier, I suppose, but I didn't. If you'd once again stand, please, for the doxology and the unison affirmation, which we'll do first. We gather together to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate within a caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives. Joys can lift the heart and spirit. Concerns can weigh them down. Sharing within a community of friends raises a joy to ever greater heights, or provide balm and lessens the weighty burden of concern. If you have a joy or a concern that you'd like to share with us, we hope you'll share it. Please know that the service is live streamed, and so be sensitive to the issue of names and making sure that if you do mention a name, you've gotten that person's approval. Please raise your hand, and once again, the microphone will find you. Joys and concerns.
Lindley's. I had a joy yesterday. 3 of us octos and 1 nanos went out to lunch. We laughed so hard. We had people in the restaurant laughing with us. That was a terrific joy. And we've all been in this fellowship forever.
Anyone else? You know, I don't usually think that it's appropriate to get too much into current events and all that, but I guess I do have a concern, and I'll make it very, very short and sweet, and that is that the U.S. vetoed the UN resolution for an immediate ceasefire to end the barbarism going on in Gaza. The reading. No man is an island, and this was selected in keeping with Brett's theme today. It was composed or written by John Donne, who was a 16th, 17th century metaphysical poet. He was also a scholar, a soldier, and also a cleric in the Church of England. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a cloud be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Now take a moment to find your own peace and solitude, a place of your own, far from the tempest and turmoil of the world around us. The next reading is Imagine by John Lennon. Imagine that. 20th century English musician. You all know that. Songwriter, one of the founding members of the Beatles, along with Paul McCartney, I guess generally regarded as the two primary founding members, with all due respect to George Harrison and Ringo Starr. The group that profoundly changed popular music in the 60s and 70s, and for that matter, has ever since. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us, only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion, too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of men. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. You know, there's an old saying about what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Not always, and we're fortunate for that, because you see, prior to returning to Wisconsin, Brett lived in Las Vegas for 4 years, where he served as the president of the Nevada Community Foundation. In 2007, he was named a person of influence in the annual Influence issue of In Business Las Vegas. The magazine called Brett one of the men and women who make things happen in Nevada. We're fortunate that he and his family did not stay in Vegas, and they moved to Wisconsin, where today Brett is president and CEO of the Door County Community Foundation. And under his leadership since 2008, the Community Foundation has become the premier vehicle for bringing people together to address issues facing Door County, and then has been held up as a model for other communities. During Brett's tenure, countless projects have been launched and or been aided under the Community Foundation, including the Door County Scholarship Network, the Door County Coin Business Mentoring and Microloan Programs, the Women's Fund, Healthy Water Door County, Discuss Door County, the Crime Prevention Foundation, Right On Door County, the Crest Pavilion, and the Sturgeon Bay Skate Park, the Door County Civility Project, and too many others to mention here. He's also he writes a regular column on philanthropy in the Peninsula Pulse, one that I always read and encourage you to do as well. He's a gifted writer and a speaker, and we're honored to have him here this morning. Brett?
Thank you. I always have to laugh when someone talks about me as president and CEO of the Community Foundation, because particularly this past week, I think it was Wednesday, there was a problem with the toilet So the president of the CEO of the community foundation is the guy there trying to jiggle the toilet to make it stop running. It's a glamorous position, I know. We all have our role to play in this world. You know, in many ways, it feels to me to be really appropriate to be speaking here today at a Unitarian Universalist Association, because my personal journey crosses a lot of different faiths and denominations over the years. I grew up in Hawaii as a very Catholic person in a very Catholic family. Father Damien's legacy loomed large in my family. Father Damien, now known as Saint Damien of Molokai, my family has been caring for one of his churches, the Our Lady of Seven Sorrows in Awalapue, for the last century, long since he passed on. Father Damien, of course, being the legendary priest who served those with leprosy at a time when everybody else rejected them. His legacy was such a large presence in my life that if you were to go to my office in Sturgeon Bay, which is more than 4,000 miles from where I grew up, you'll still see a picture of Father Damien on the wall, because that's what we all did in the Bikoi family. While I was raised Catholic and attended Mass and catechism every Sunday, the best school around was run by the Episcopalians, the Episcopal Church. So my father sent me there. So every Tuesday, I'd have an Episcopal priest who'd be teaching us of the Bible. And every Thursday, I'd attend an Episcopalian service. I still remember the lines from one of my favorite Episcopalian hymns. And if you'll forgive my singing, but it goes, "Come labor on, who dare stand idle while there's work to be done," which is like the quintessential Episcopalian hymn, by the way, if you know the Episcopalian Church. Then when I left Hawaii to go to college, I went to New England to study at Tufts University. Now, Tufts University was founded by the Universalists, which eventually would merge with the Unitarians to become the Unitarian Universalist Association. And so my alma mater to this day has a very strong tradition, and that legacy of the Unitarian Universalist tradition still looms large at my alma mater. Now, over the years, many of my cousins in Hawaii have left the Catholic Church and were born again as evangelicals. So as a young man in my 20s, I found myself attending evangelical services with many of them. And even at one point in my journey, if you go back far enough, I explored Buddhism for a short period of time, and even had the opportunity to attend a teach-in taught by the Dalai Lama himself in Toronto of some 25 years ago. I'll tell you, I've never seen a faith or religious leader who laughed so much and was so joy-filled while standing there before the audience. It was like he was the physical manifestation of just happiness. It was a wonderful thing to see. Ultimately, though, I found that I couldn't fully embrace the Buddhist concept that life is suffering and that the path away from suffering is to let go of all of my cravings. I have a pretty intimate relationship with some of my cravings, and I'm not that willing to give them up. But 15 years ago, my wife and I finally found our way to the United Church of Christ. Now, every Sunday, we make our home at Hope Church in Sturgeon Bay. Well, maybe 2 out of every 3 Sundays, if I'm going to be honest with you. But it was with the Catholics as a boy that I first studied the Bible and read John chapter 13, verse 34. Now, in their version of the Bible, it says, "I give you a new commandment, love one another. As I have loved you, so also should you love one another." Now, although the specific words may vary, some variation of this very fundamental idea runs through virtually every religious and faith tradition in the world. Love one another. Just as I have loved you, love one another. Now, there are a lot of different ways. A lot of different churches over the years have tried to live into those words. And quite frankly, some of the interpretations about how they choose to live into those words are ones with which I would vehemently disagree with. But it doesn't diminish the beauty or the wisdom of that basic idea of love one another. Now, I know some of you here today, and so I know this is a pretty well-educated group of folks. So I guess that many of you are familiar with the works of David Brooks, from his columns in the New York Times to his books on the road to character, more recently, The Second Mountain. Brooks has become perhaps my favorite contemporary author. So I quote liberally from him in the columns I write, and the things I talk about, and the chats I give like I'm doing here today. Brooks writes about what he considers 4 interrelated crises confronting our nation today. The first crisis is what Brooks calls a crisis of loneliness. 35% of Americans, more than 1 out of every 3 of us over the age of 45, are chronically lonely. Only 8% of us report having had a meaningful conversation with a neighbor in the last year. Now, I'll admit it, I'm there too. My wife and I get along just fine with our neighbors. I've plowed their snow on wintry days, and we've periodically chatted about the weather. But our relationship can best be characterized by click and wave. We all know what that is, click and wave, right? You click to open the garage door, and then you wave at your neighbor while you drive by. That's sort of the nature of what we do. Only 8% of us have had a meaningful conversation with our neighbor, despite the fact that they live right next door to us. Researchers asked pastors across the country of all denominations to identify the most common issue they have to address with members of their church. 76% of pastors across all denominations say that loneliness and the mental health problems associated with a lack of a support system are the most common issues that they address. And these are people who go to church. These are people who have a community, presumably. The problem is that many of us don't have any community at all. The fastest growing religion in the United States, unaffiliated. The former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy wrote, "During my time caring for patients, the most common pathology I saw was not heart disease nor diabetes. It was loneliness." We have a crisis of loneliness in our country today. The second crisis that Brooks identified is distrust. It's what he calls the crisis of alienation. Now, the former leftist turned conservative sociologist Robert Nisbet defined alienation thusly: the state of mind that can find a social order remote, incomprehensible, or fraudulent, beyond real hope or desire, inviting apathy, boredom, or even hostility. Think about those words, right? Believing that the social order is fraudulent and beyond hope, feeling hostility toward it, that's pretty much the state of affairs in America today. A few generations ago, there was a healthy social contract in our country. People rightly assumed that self-sacrifice made sense. If you served your country, your community, your church, your employer, or whatever organization to which you kept faith, it would serve you back. But faith in that giving compact has broken down. Now, too many of us assume that if you share, they will take advantage of your giving. If you sacrifice, they will exploit your generosity. If you give, they will take. And like any set of expectations, if you believe something about someone for long enough, they begin to live up to or down to your expectations. Poll after poll demonstrates that our faith in the social compact of serving something greater than ourselves is collapsing. The trust in the reciprocity of investing in our nation's institutions is waning. People are feeling more and more detached from their neighbors and disgusted by the institutions of public life. Not only are we confronting a crisis of loneliness in our country, we are experiencing a crisis of alienation. But Brooks identifies a third crisis that we face. As we become detached from each other and growing increasingly lonely, as we become alienated from the institutions that are supposed to bring us together, we are experiencing a third crisis in America. It's a crisis of meaning. Over the last 50 years, church attendance has fallen by almost 50%. But it's not just faith in God or some higher power that's declining. We're losing faith in all kinds of institutions that once brought meaning to our lives. As humans, we need to belong to a community. We draw meaning from being a part of something bigger than ourselves. We used to believe in the dignity of work, but today, only 25% of us trust our employer. We used to believe in Walter Cronkite, but today, only 23% of us trust what we read and see in the news. We used to believe in justice for all, but today only 22% of us trust the court system. We used to believe in our governmental leaders and our political leaders, but today only 17% of us trust our own government. But perhaps most disturbing of all, for the very first time in the history of our country, a majority of Americans do not believe that the American dream is possible. As a country, as an entire nation, we are on the verge of failing to believe in any institution anymore. We are losing faith in the value of faith itself. Our increasing loneliness, our growing alienation from institutions, our waning sense of meaning in life. Brooks argues that these first three crises have given rise to the fourth and most dangerous crisis of all, a crisis of tribalism. Now, tribalism seems like a good way to restore the bonds of a community. It certainly does bind people together as members of a tribe, but tribalism is the dark twin of community. Community is based on a connection of mutual affection. Tribalism is a connection based on mutual hatred. Community thrives when we share a common humanity. Tribalism thrives when we fight a common enemy. The tribal mentality is a warrior mentality based on scarcity. Life is a battle for scarce resources, so it's us versus them. It's a zero-sum game. And if you look at life through a tribal lens, then the ends justify the means. Politics is war. Ideas are combat. It's kill or be killed. Mistrust is the tribalist's worldview. And the fastest growing and most prevalent tribe in America today is partisan hatred. Far, far fewer Americans today claim to be a member of either political party, yet Americans are far, far more likely to vote for a single political party than ever before. Now think about that for a moment, right? You are far less likely to identify yourself as a Democrat or a Republican now than at any point in U.S. history. Yet today, you are far more likely to only vote for Democrats or only vote for Republicans than ever before. Now, this seems like a contradiction, but it makes perfect sense when you realize that our politics has become tribal. I vote for this political party, not because I believe in this party's ideas. I vote for this political party because I hate that political party. Once upon a time, I was a Democrat or a Republican because I believed in things. I believed in the values. I believed in the policies of the Democratic or the Republican Party. A party was a community of kindred spirits that came together in service of something greater than themselves. But today, more and more, our political identity is instead rooted in the hatred of the other political party. As we've grown isolated, more mistrusting, and less connected to the institutions that give our lives meaning, people are seeking attachments wherever they can. And political identity, as defined by a hatred of the other side, has become our tribe. Tribal politics today defines itself as the difference between right and wrong. It's a battle between light and darkness. It's a conflict between good and evil. But this is a very dangerous way to look at your fellow citizens. Because once your politics becomes your moral identity, it becomes impossible to compromise. Because in the fight between good and evil, you don't compromise with evil. Once your politics becomes your moral identity, then every election is an existential struggle for survival. So everything is permitted, everything is fair game. We're using tribal partisan identity in an attempt to fill the void that's being left behind as our other attachments are withering away. It feels to me as if too many of us have bought into what our Buddhist friends call the illusion of separateness. It's this place where we judge one another and thus feel the impossibility of anything ever getting bridged. The gulf is too wide, the gap too distant, and the walls grow, and suddenly we forget who we are meant to be to one another. Mother Teresa summed up the world's ills most succinctly. We've simply forgotten that we belong to each other. But there is a way forward. The crises that David Brooks identified do not have an identifiable or an inevitable outcome. Our future is not a fait accompli. The answer is extraordinarily simple and yet overwhelmingly ambitious. We simply need to rebuild community, a real community. We need to do things together, especially with those with whom we disagree. For when we do things together, whatever those things might be, with those with whom we disagree, it becomes harder to demonize each other. And when we stop looking at those with whom we disagree as demons, you can begin rebuilding the bonds of trust and friendship that are the basis of a healthy society. I like to tell the story of two real people in our community. Many of you are going to know them: Ed Douglas and John Herlash. Politically, these two gentlemen couldn't be more different. Ed Douglas is unapologetically progressive, and John Herlash's son once described him as being slightly to the right of Attila the Hun. Now, these two guys, if they were getting into a discussion of any political ideology, I doubt they'd agree on anything. And yet, when our community's own Rick Nelson, as a part of the Moravian Church several years ago, went off to Honduras to run a rural hospital, Ed Douglas and John Herlash worked together to convince the Rotary clubs in the Rotary District, to convince our community to tirelessly give money to go ahead and purchase a container filled with medical supplies and equipment, and they shipped it to this third world rural hospital. These guys don't seemingly agree on anything politically, but they agreed on this one thing. This one thing. So they worked together on this one thing. Together. When we work together with other people for a common purpose, they stop becoming caricatures and start becoming living, breathing, real human beings. We need to build a more diverse, universal community, not insular tribes of people who see things the same way. We need to build bridges between people who see things differently. You know, perhaps more than any other kind of institution, our churches have the greatest potential to help build those bridges. But that potential is not within the walls of any particular church or fellowship. The potential is in the connections one church community can make with other church communities. Now, all Christian denominations use the Bible with some variation of John chapter 13, verse 34, and virtually every faith tradition has a similar foundational belief. Remember, that's love one another. Love one another just as I have loved you. The problem is that as institutions, that kind of interfaith ecumenical work doesn't always come very easily to us. Several years ago, I heard something that awakened me to this challenge. It made me immediately look up the author's work. The wisdom of these next observations are not mine, but frankly, my memory is not what it once was, so you have to forgive me for not giving attribution to the appropriate source, but here it is nonetheless. The reason a denomination exists is because but for the existence of that denomination, its members believe that some fundamental aspect of God's teachings would be lost. Now, this is really important, so I'm going to say that again. The reason a denomination exists is because but for the existence of that denomination, its members believe that some fundamental aspect of God's teachings would be lost. Now, for many people, they are members of a denomination because of family or tradition or culture. For many, theology is a secondary consideration as to what church they choose to attend. But for a church's hierarchy, for its pastors and its ministers, for its lay leaders, and for its most devoted members, that unique understanding of some fundamental aspect of God's teachings calls upon them to keep faith not only with their God or some higher power, but with the denomination itself. Differences in how we understand and interpret God's word is why we have different denominations. Thus, if my denomination exists apart from others because of those differences, it makes sense that in the teachings that go on in our church, we're going to talk about how we are different. I'm a lay leader of the United Church of Christ of Wisconsin. I'm the current chair of the board of directors of the conference. Along with the Unitarian Universalists, the UCC church to which I belong is one of the most open-minded denominations that exist. We take great pride in being welcoming to all people, regardless of what they believe and where they are on their faith journey. And yet, I once found myself in an argument with a UCC minister who felt strongly that our open-minded church should have the absolute right to exclude people who aren't sufficiently open-minded. Think about that, right? When any church gathers as a church community, it's likely that our teachings are going to focus on what makes my church different from your church and from the secular world around us. And so it becomes difficult for us to find common ground with those outside the walls of our church fellowship. And so we place too much emphasis on what makes them different from us. James Robison, the conservative founder and president of Life Outreach International, once wrote about a conversation he had with the late Billy Graham that changed his life forever. Robison asked Graham, "How can you associate with those people who, in my opinion, have some theological beliefs that are just plain wrong?" Billy Graham responded, "I suggest you get to know the people you've been taught to avoid." Robison then wrote, "I then understood just how wrong I was, how we can take our differences to such extremes we don't have to compromise our beliefs. Yet sometimes in defense of our faith, we compromise God's love. Love one another, just as I have loved you." You know, more than a decade ago, I was a part of a handful of people who worked together to launch the Women's Fund of Door County. I remember in the earliest days of the Women's Fund receiving a call from one of Door County's great philanthropists. She called me up, but very nicely, but very firmly, asked me, "What is the Women's Fund's position on the issue of abortion?" I answered her truthfully. I said that we have not talked about it. She said, "I don't believe you. I know several of those women involved there. There's no way you have not had a discussion about the issue of abortion." I said, "We have deliberately not talked about the issue of abortion because I know that we will not agree on it. We will not find common ground on that particular issue. But we will agree that if a teenage girl is pregnant, we need to make sure that her child gets prenatal care. We do agree that we should help that teenage mother finish her education. And when that child is born, we all agree that we need to ensure that it has an opportunity to grow up safe from child abuse and neglect. We spend so much time thinking about and obsessing about what separates us that we lose sight of all the things that connect us. We, as denominations, as churches, as individual people, we need to stop focusing on the issues that divide us. We need to identify those things that can unite us, those things that we can do together. Then let's go about the business of doing them together. This doesn't require us to compromise our beliefs or betray our faith. We're each on a life journey. We don't know if and when our paths might diverge in the future, but let's walk together for as long as we can. And let's not obsess about some fork in the road down the road when it's beyond our horizon. This is how we rebuild faith in our country. One community at a time, one church at a time, really one relationship at a time. walking side by side, rejoicing in the things that we can do together? The answer is extraordinarily simple, yet overwhelmingly ambitious. We need to reconnect with those who differ from us. We need to rebuild community. Too many of us have grown accustomed to thinking that loving others as God loves us is hard. We've come to believe that it's about moral strain and mighty obligation. We presume that loving others as God loves us requires a spiritual muscularity of which we are not capable. Sometimes it feels like God's way requires a layering of burden on top of sacrifice, and because I grew up Catholic, it comes with a side order of guilt. Father Xavier Leon Dufour was a French Jesuit scholar and a renowned theologian. He literally wrote the book on biblical theology. Oh, and by the way, I'm using the word literally in the correct manner because the title of Dufour's book was The Book of Biblical Theology. In any case, Dufour was reported to have said shortly before his death, "I have written so many books on God, but after all of that, what do I really know? I think in the end, God is the person you are talking to, the one right in front of you. Love one another, just as I have loved you."
Thank you for those very inspirational words. By the way, Brett mentioned David Brooks. He's a syndicated columnist for the New York Times, but Buttons and I pretty much calibrate our Friday activities to about 6:30 in the evening when he appears with Capehart, Brooks and Capehart, on the NewsHour. So if you want to know more about David Brooks, New York Times, Brooks and Capehart on the NewsHour. Please stand, if willing and able, and join now in the singing of hymn 1026, If Every Woman in the World. I extinguish the flame, though not the light, of the chalice with this poem that I actually wrote for this message and this occasion. My blood courses through your arteries, your blood through my veins. Let us not neglect to seize that for which this metaphor aims, a safe and a sharing and a sacred humankind, one toward which we're all inclined. Following the post, not yet. Hold on, Joey. Following the postlude, please join us in the gathering room for coffee, mice, and conversation. You'll catch the gist of that shortly. After about 15 minutes, we'll have a talk back here in the sanctuary, set up some chairs right in here with Brett. Talk back lasting maybe 20 to 30 minutes, during which time you can ask Brett questions or make observations. We hope you'll join us for that. And now the postlude, "O Come All Ye Faithful," played by a true giant at the age of 20 of the jazz world from Indonesia, discovered by Wynton Marsalis at the age of 11, played in Door County on November 3rd of this year at the Door Community Auditorium. Incredible concert, sparsely attended, unfortunately. He's 15 years old at the time of this playing, he and his trio, doing "O Come All Ye Faithful," and I hope you enjoy his musicianship. I hope you enjoy this season. And thanks to Beth for indulging me. Please join us for coffee and, as I said, mice and